They called her hot but dumb behind her back and sometimes to her face, laughing in packs, snickering during class, whispering comments with venom dipped in fake sugar, as if her beauty disqualified her from having a brain, as if her confidence in walking tall and wearing what she liked meant she had nothing intelligent to offer, and though Elara Monroe heard it all, every cruel joke, every backhanded compliment like, "You're smarter than you look," or "You're not just a pretty face," she never responded, never fought back, not because she didn't want to, but because after years of growing up in a world that judged her worth by waist size and lip gloss, she'd learned that speaking up only invited more judgment, more disbelief, more dismissal. She'd been taught early on that being beautiful was a currency, but being smart while beautiful was a rebellion. And rebellion had consequences, so she smiled, wore her silence like a silk glove, and buried her thoughts in journals and online forums, answering anonymous science questions with grace and clarity, hiding behind usernames while the world around her painted her as a walking cliché, a girl with nothing behind the mascara and manicured nails. Until everything changed the day a new adjunct professor named Aidan Keller stepped into her astrophysics class, his voice calm and clear, his eyes sharp. Yet kind, and unlike others, he didn't scan the room for the smart-looking students or call on the usual front-row faces. Instead, he posed a question about entropy and let the silence stretch awkwardly, challengingly, until one hand went up slowly, hesitantly, from the back row where Elara sat, hoping and fearing she'd be noticed, and when he nodded for her to speak, she unraveled a response so precise, so nuanced, that the entire class turned to stare, and for the first time, the silence wasn't assuming, it was stunned. Aidan didn't blink, didn't condescend, he only smiled and said, "Excellent observation, Miss Monroe," and moved on, as if it were perfectly normal that the girl they mocked had just outthought them all, and that moment, it cracked something open in her, a door long shut, and in the weeks that followed, she began participating more, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, her questions laced with insight, her answers thoughtful, until even the most dismissive students started to take notice, though not all responded kindly. Some mocked her more viciously now, threatened by the idea that the girl they called Barbie with a brain might actually be smarter than them, but Aidan saw it all, and in quiet moments after class, he'd offer encouragement, slide books toward her with sticky notes saying, "Thought of you," and push her to think even bigger, until one day, after submitting a theoretical paper on dark matter for an undergraduate conference, Elara received an invitation to present, an honor usually reserved for graduate students, and the backlash was immediate, accusations of favoritism, plagiarism, people suggesting she must have seduced her way in. But Aidan stood by her, his reputation risking a hit as he publicly vouched for her work, calling it refreshingly original, and scientifically sound, and that quiet act of belief lit something fierce inside her, reminding her of all the nights she'd cried over being overlooked, all the times she'd been underestimated simply for existing in a body people deemed too pretty to be intelligent, and with that fire, she walked onto the conference stage in her red heels and gave a presentation that earned her a standing ovation, not because she shocked them with charm, but because her mind commanded respect. Still, the praise didn't silence the critics, some called it luck, others said she had help, but Elara no longer needed their approval, because slowly, she was building something greater, a voice, a presence, a power, and with Aidan's subtle guidance, she started a science blog under a pseudonym. The Quiet Catalyst, explaining complex theories in relatable terms, using humor, storytelling, and metaphors that turned intimidating formulas into fascinating ideas, and within a year, the blog exploded, gaining traction among students, educators, and even scientists who praised its clarity and brilliance, yet none of them knew it was Elara behind it all. She'd kept her identity secret, partly to let the work speak for itself, and partly out of fear that once they saw her face, the old labels would return. But life has a way of forcing truth into the open, and it happened when a national science magazine listed The Quiet Catalyst as one of the top 10 science voices of the year, and invited the anonymous author to speak at a TEDx conference, and after weeks of wrestling with herself, Elara made the choice to reveal who she was, walking onto that stage in a fitted blazer and soft curls, looking every bit the woman they dismissed. And as the crowd whispered in surprise, she smiled gently and said, "You know me as the Quiet Catalyst, but some of you might also know me as the girl you never thought was worth listening to," and then she launched into a talk so raw, so insightful, blending science with personal truth, weaving equations with experiences, that by the time she finished, the audience was in tears and awe, not just for the brilliance of her mind but the courage of her journey. The video went viral, viewed millions of times in days, and suddenly, the same people who once called her dumb were quoting her, reposting her lines, pretending they'd always believed in her. But Elara didn't care about the sudden love, because her victory wasn't in their praise, it was in her own self-recognition, in finally feeling whole. Still, not everything was perfect. Her rise came with pressure, scrutiny, even threats from internet trolls who couldn't stand the idea of a woman, a beautiful woman, being smarter than them, and she leaned on Aiden through those storms, their bond deepening, evolving from mentorship to a quiet love built not on need but mutual respect. And though they kept it private for a long time, the way he looked at her during lectures, the way she lit up around him, it was clear to anyone who truly saw them. Eventually, Elara received offers from tech giants, think tanks, and even NASA, but she turned them down to teach, to stay rooted in the place where she'd once been silenced, determined to change it for those who came next, launching a mentorship program for young girls interested in STEM, writing books, giving talks in schools where students clapped for her like she was a rock star, and always reminding them that intelligence has no look, that beauty and brilliance can coexist, that their worth isn't measured by how the world sees them, but how they choose to rise. And years later, when she was named the youngest dean of innovation at the university, standing before a sea of students who looked at her with admiration instead of assumption, she opened her speech with the same words that had once shattered her heart. "They called me hot but dumb," letting the sentence hang in the air before continuing. "But he called me brilliant. And I finally believed it," pointing to Aiden in the front row, now her husband, her partner, her equal, as the crowd rose in applause, not just for her accomplishments, but for the journey she'd carved with grace and grit, turning every insult into fuel, every doubt into determination. And as the music played and cameras flashed, Elara walked off that stage not as the girl they once dismissed, but as the woman who rewrote what brilliance could look like, reminding the world that true intelligence isn't just in knowing the answers, but in choosing to be yourself, unapologetically, even when no one believes in you yet.